Welcome to another VFL video. My name is TMV, and today we're going to talk about teams you want to target. Because here's the thing, when you're picking your players for VFL, you're not only picking the players, you are partly picking the teams that they're on as well, and the teams that they will play against. Because here's the thing, right? You get points for winning maps, which is more of a team element, right? Your individual player could still kind of do pretty bad, but you still win the map and you still get the points for winning, for instance, 2-0. So targeting teams and, targeting teams to play against is very important. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through Pacific, Americas, and EMEA and basically just talk about, teams that I feel pretty good about, and players that you might want on those teams because they've got some easier games or, they're looking pretty good, all that stuff. So let's start in Pacific. Let's start with the actual current champions T1 here at Masters Bangkok. And T1, you look at that group and you look at their fixtures here, and they start off with a really nice fixture at Zeta Division, right? And you look at the rest of this group and you probably think T1 probably should be doing pretty well in this group, right? Like, obviously we know they've got a very, very good team. They just won Masters Bangkok. And this isn't like a murderous row of a group, right? It's actually fairly feasible that T1 might win all of these games. I'd say the most likely outcome is probably they win 4 and go 4-1. But, it's fairly possible they might win all 5, right? And they start off with a nice, comeback from Masters Bangkok game against Zeta Division as well. So nice and easy there. So I would say T1 in Pacific, I would say it's looking pretty good for them overall. The other group here I would say is more difficult, right? Obviously DRX were pretty good for most of Pacific kickoff as well, so you might be looking at them. Problem is they do play Paper Rex first, and you might be like, ooh, that's pretty difficult. I'd say for DRX, Hyunmin is one I would look out for. Other than that, I'm not actually sure that DRX players are necessarily the best, just because their group does seem, fairly tough overall. And, for most of their group, I don't think there's any easy games, to be honest. I don't think anyone's an easy game in this group whatsoever. For Group Omega, I do think Talon are another one where you could look at them and go, they should beat Team Secret. You can then maybe assess RRQ and Nongshim. Zeta Division, this 4th game is pretty nice. And if you need to get a Talon player out for the last week against T1, then you could do that as well. So that's not too bad if you want to go Talon players. And I actually think maybe even Team Secret players, right? So hear me out. Team Secret players, if you believe that, like, they're actually better than they showed during kickoff, and, they played Talon week 1, it's not ideal, but it's not impossible that they could even win that game maybe, or at least, win a map and do okay. And then they play Zeta Division, right? And at that point, you're probably thinking they'll beat Zeta Division. Now, if Team Secret still don't look so great, you could, after this game, you can just get rid of them, right? But having, like, one Team Secret player, maybe if they do beat Talon and beat Zeta and do look better, maybe you can even hold them for the T1 game, bench them, and then play them versus Nongshim and RRQ, feeling pretty good about where they are. Okay, let's move on to Americas. And the Americas groups, I don't think there is an easier and hard one like maybe there is in Pacific. So this is perhaps a little bit tougher overall. Obviously, G2, just because they're G2, should be a pretty safe bet. And I would say you probably do want a G2 player, right? Unlike T1, where you could see T1, losing a map, honestly, maybe every single game, right? That wouldn't shock me if T1 did that, because they're that kind of team, whereas G2 aren't that kind of team. G2 are the kind of team that is probably gonna win maybe 3, maybe even 4 2-0s, right? Like, that genuinely is on the card. Like, it would not shock me if they only lost 1 or 2 maps here, G2. They start off with a very nice game versus Furia, right? Really nice bounce back, comeback from Bangkok game. So I really like G2. As picks, I think you probably do want a G2 player in there because, G2 are obviously just very good, and I think they will win a lot of games cleanly. And again, like, this is a group that you could see them doing pretty well in overall. The rest of Group Omega, I think, is kind of just down to what you really believe in, right? If you have a good feeling about any of these teams, go for it. Absolutely go for it. In the other group, it's quite interesting because EG, and in the drafts I've seen so far, a lot of people have been going EG. They play 2G in their first game. Now, this should be a home banker 2-0 win. So if you want to go for a 1-week kind of punt on an Icy or, any EG player, really, anyone who you think is going to pop off, that's a perfectly good punt, right? And then have them as your kind of first transfer out next week, I think is absolutely fine. Now, from there, I don't feel too good about EG, but honestly, having one EG player in as someone that you then transfer out, I think is probably going to be a pretty good idea. Now, again, the Group Alpha here, I would say is quite open. And, you know, you're always circling that 2G game, right? So, for instance, Sen, it's the last game, but that's not ideal, generally speaking, because you'll want to keep getting in EMEA players. The earlier you play 2G, the better, essentially. So, Loud play 2G second, so, you know, that could be okay. But again, Loud play EG, you know, fifth. So, really, if you're any of the other teams not named EG or 2G, you want to kind of get them as early as you possibly can. Crew here, get them third and fourth, which is okay. And 100 Thieves here, have them second and fourth. So unfortunately, there isn't like a clear like, oh, you play EG and 2G in the first 3 weeks. You know, get 2 of their players because they're going to have 2 good games. There isn't quite that for anyone in this group because 2G and EG play each other the first week. So that's a bit unfortunate, but you know, again, if you want to go for an EG player, and then again, if you feel good about any of kind of Crew, 100 Thieves, Loud, Sen, I think, are a bit too shaky to really believe in. I would probably lean my kind of... If you feel good about one of an alpha team and one of an omega team that isn't G2, I would probably lean for the alpha team, right? So if you're a 100 Thieves stan and you think they're going to do well, you don't have to play G2, essentially, right? Like, if you feel good about Lev, unfortunately for you, well, when it comes to the G2 game, you're not going to feel good about that one, probably no matter what, right? So really, I think if you have a hunch in Americas, you want to pick a group alpha team. And then finally, we have EMEA. And for EMEA, obviously, there's kind of the whole thing of by the end of, you know, game week 6 is what it'll be for EMEA. You're going to want a EMEA players as your whole team, right? You're going to keep transferring in EMEA players. So the truth is, if you really want to big brain this and you really want to finish first in the world, the way you would do this is probably plan out your EMEA transfers, right? In terms of which team in which week are you going to bring in because they have an easy game, right? So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking the Group Omega is the easier of the 2 groups, with Foot probably being the best chance here. They start off with 2 very good games. So you could start off, you know, with a Foot player or bringing in a Foot player for this first Koi game, right? Then bringing in another Foot player for this Gentle Mates game if you wanted to. And then kind of riding that out with, you know, Team Liquid, Comic, or BBL and basically just hoping the Foot, you know, do look pretty good. And you can base your second transfer here, right? Like, if Foot struggle against Koi, maybe they still win. But if they struggle, maybe you don't go for the second Foot player and just ride with one instead. But if they destroy Koi, maybe then you go, okay, Foot look pretty good. Let's ride them the whole way through, right? But again, this group is pretty open. You know, you could go for someone like Karming Core. Again, you're probably looking at targeting Koi and Gentle Mates players, right? So Karming Core here in the first couple weeks. You know, this first 3 games, could Karming Core start 3-0? Yeah, maybe. Like, yeah, that seems like a possibility. So you might want to get a Karming Core player if you can. Generally, you're going to want to start with pretty cheap EMEA players just to enable the rest of your squad. And then obviously bring in more expensive EMEA players as we go on. And I do think that you'll want a Koi or Gentle Mates player because, for instance, let's say you go someone like Shados who costs 6 right now, right? You can just ride Shados all the way through the bench and just have him as bench fodder. But then he's going to play in this final week for you. But they play Gentle Mates, right? So whether you want a cheap Koi or a cheap Gentle Mates player, both of those seem like decent options to me, to be honest, right? Because that last game, like, you could end up with, in theory, like 2 Koi or 2 Gentle Mates players and just kind of bet on the fact that they're gonna win this last game when you need them to play, and they just ride the bench the rest of the time, right? You don't play them in any of the first 4 weeks and you just hope that they win this last game essentially, because it is a somewhat winnable game. You know, Apex, obviously, again, some cheap players for Apex. You know, Molsey in particular is one that I think is going to be pretty popular to just ride out for the bench. They do play Giants in the last week, so again, not too bad if you can, you know, ride them through the bench. That, I mean, like, maybe Apex can win that game, right? Like, maybe if you squint. For Vitality, if you want to go kind of safe in the MEA, it's not the best, right? You probably want to bring in Vitality players, I would say, here, right? Where you've got the guaranteed or more guaranteed wins of Apex and Navi, right? Like, I think you want to wait till after the Heretics game, where they, you know, who knows, they might be struggling. You know, maybe they've lost one of these games, who knows? And then, you know, you've got 2 kind of easier games that you can bring them in. So Vitality probably a bit later. For teams like Team Heretics, they start off with Apex, so if you really want to go all in on these first couple weeks, then Heretics seem like a decent option. But yeah, that's some teams to target there. And, you know, if you want to go through all of the kind of games yourself and figure out what teams you like, then that's a perfectly good way of trying to figure out who should be on your team.